Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Catherine and this is Raspberry Reads. Today, as I'm filming this, I woke up to over 500 subscribers on my channel, which is just blowing my mind. My channel has grown so considerably in the past, like 10 days since I posted my historical fiction recommendation video. And that's just so cool for me. I was not expecting to reach that many people so quickly. So thank you so much for subscribing if you're new here. Thank you very much to my subscribers who have been around since the beginning. It means the world to me that you are here to just listen to what I have to say about books. So yeah, thanks very much. And I guess I'll talk about my May wrap up now. So May was a really good reading month for me. Surprisingly, I've got quite a lot going on in my life right now, but I still managed to read 9 books in May, that's quite unusual for me. I would normally read sort of 4 or 5 books. So I will say that quite a few of these are audiobooks, and some of them were actually quite short audiobooks, so that's why the number is a little bit higher. But yeah, so let's just get right into it and I'll tell you about what I read, shall we? So the first book, and I think I've mentioned this to you on my channel before because I hadn't finished it, is an audiobook that I listened to called Nuclear Family. And that's written by Kate Davies. And the narrator was Olivia Darnley. So I would say with this book that it started out on a high. I found it funny, or at least witty, and I was generally intrigued by the premise. So it's mostly about a family with 2 twin adult daughters, and they are both exploring growing their family, but in very different ways. So yes, and there were elements of this book that were quite funny, but actually it ended up being, on the whole, quite a sad book. It was just a bit of a downer, and it wasn't really what I had expected going into it. I will say that the narration was really good, and the writing was pretty good. I found most of the characters to be lovable, or at least tolerable, except for the character of Lena. She's one of the daughters. Anytime her character was focused on, she just really irritated me. I thought that the book provided some good conversation about fertility struggles, fertility options, and parent identity. So one of the daughters is in a same-sex relationship, so they're exploring first IUI, which is the sort of just sperm donor insemination, and then they start exploring IVF further down the line. And then the other daughter, Lena, is also exploring sort of what it means to be family, but in a different way. This was a contemporary fiction, and I will say, so when it was written, it was around the time of Brexit and also when Extinction Rebellion protests were just getting started. And although you could make the argument that any book has that's sort of set in the present ends up having sort of historical moments which attribute the book to that time period, I felt that the focus on those particular elements hasn't aged well. It feels like a contemporary work in that it's meant to be set sort of in the present in which you're reading it, and by including those bits, I felt that it's dated it a little bit and not in a good way. So overall, yeah, I think it started out on a high, and then I wouldn't say I lost interest, but I definitely didn't like the book sort of the rest of the way through. So I gave this book a 3 out of 5. Not the best thing I ever read, and I wouldn't particularly recommend it to anybody, unfortunately. Next up, we have an ebook that I read, and this is Electric Idol by Katie Robert, and this is the second in the something Olympus series. I can't remember the series, but the first one was Neon Gods, and this is a romantasy series, so romantic fantasy. known for having quite good smut, spice, however you want to call it. So let me just give you a rundown of the things I liked about it and the things that I didn't like about it in no particular order. So firstly, I did not like the dialogue. I thought that the writing of the dialogue was atrocious. I really liked the premise of this one, which is a enemies to lovers kind of trope, but I felt that the plot sort of lost momentum halfway through. I think that it's a positive that this book focused so much and in the way that it did on positive body image. So this is about Psyche and Eros, and Psyche is portrayed as a plus-size woman, and much of the sort of plot points and personification of her has to do with body image. I would say that it was a little bit overdone though. And I liked the chemistry between Psyche and Eros, both when they meet initially, and again, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but they meet initially and then they end up having to spend time together. But yes, I think that how the characters were written worked really well in that there were tensions, but both like sort of regular tensions, but also sexual tension. But that they also had sort of like coming together and understanding on many points. One of the things that I really like about Katee Roberts' books is that the story is told in from both perspectives. So I should say that if you haven't read these, they're set in Olympus, but an ultra-modern version of Olympus. So they're basically Greek myth retellings. And in her stories, she tells the narrative, but in alternating perspectives. And I really like that. I think it brings sort of an extra dimension to the story. I would say that this sequel, so Electric Idol, if you particularly are into books that focus on social media and how we interact with social media, I think this one will be particularly for you. That side of things, I could sort of take or leave. I will also say that the spice element in this was okay. I think I preferred the first one, Neon Gods, a little bit more. But that's not to say that it put me off continuing. So yeah, as I get to them, I will continue with this Olympus series. And I gave Electric Idol 3 out of 5. If you like romantasy, then and you haven't already come across these ones, then they're definitely ones to check out. All right, next, and I will say, so I mentioned that I had a really good reading month in terms of quantity, but I also had a fantastic reading month in terms of quality. I am so picky with giving 5 stars, and I gave 3 books 5 stars this month, which I don't think has ever happened before in my reading journey. So yeah, let's get to the first one. So the first one, and I don't think this will come as a surprise, is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. So I was partway through this one in April, and then I finished it in May. This was actually the copy that I gave my brother, and then he gave it to me to read. And yeah, I'm sad I waited so long, but I think I was in sort of the right frame of mind and right sort of place to read this book. So, and I mentioned in another video when I was talking about this that I was going in blind. Other than reading the back cover, I hadn't really looked at anything about this, and that I also don't know too much about Greek history, ancient Greek history. And so what I didn't realize going in, knowing nothing about Achilles, is that I didn't realize that this was a retelling of the Iliad, and that it's all about the Trojan War. And anybody who knows anything about ancient Greek history would know that a book about Achilles is based on the Iliad, but I didn't know. So that was, once I figured that out, it made a lot more sense because I couldn't figure out why I was focusing so much on a journey in warfare. But yeah, so this is a retelling of Achilles and his role in the Trojan War and how he sort of created or nurtured this sort of semi-godlike status in himself, and how that reputation was sort of maintained during the Trojan War. So there's the warfare side of it, and so I should say that I have read the Odyssey, so I was familiar with some of the characters and sort of bits and pieces. But what I liked the most about this book was the love story. I thought it was so innovative. Obviously, it's a same-sex love story. I thought it was done beautifully. So starting from when they're boys and sort of growing that friendship all the way through to having this like really intense love for each other. I thought the writing was beautiful. I found both the writing and the story captivating. And I think it was that love story element that sort of took me through the story. I was a little bit bored in the sort of last third of the book, because that's all set during the Trojan War. But you could tell that there were sort of tensions building between Achilles and his lover, Patroclus. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. If you know, maybe you could spell it phonetically in the comments for me and for anybody else who doesn't know. But yes, the love story between those two carried me through, and then the ending was just like a gut punch. I mean, you can kind of get the sense going in from reading the back cover and just knowing anything about Greek history that it's probably going to be a bit of a tragedy element. But the way in which it was approached at the end was just so beautiful and so moving that it was that ending that pushed it up to a 5-star read for me. So yeah, I'm definitely excited to read more by Madeline Miller. I can see why this book is so popular and why I think it was one of the first ones in terms of Greek myth retellings or myth retellings in general to really kind of come onto the scene. And I can see why so many people wanted to follow suit, because this is just a beautiful book. So I know I'm late to the party on this one, but I thought, I'm glad that I got to it eventually. And if you haven't read The Song of Achilles yet, then I really would recommend that you do, particularly if you like historical fiction. It's just a beautiful book. So yes, 5 stars. So glad I got to it, and thank you to my brother for letting me have the book afterwards. Okay, next up we're moving into another 5-star read, and this is an audiobook that I listened to, and it's The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and it was narrated by Daniel Henning. And so I'll start by telling you what it's about. It's basically about a social worker who has to go, his name is Linus, and Linus has to look after magical youth for his employment. And Linus ends up going to this house to basically do like a welfare check or an audit on this house, this orphanage, to make sure that it's running properly. And you sort of go from there, where he sort of has like a set mentality about his job and his life, and his own identity. And then as he goes on this journey to sort of investigate the home for the children, he also goes on a journey for himself. And it was just the most beautiful book I've come across in a long time. So I will say, I'm just going to give all the things again that I liked about it, and I guess very few things I didn't like about it. So I thought that this book had vibes of Harry Potter and X-Men, and then also in its tone of humor, like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and Terry Pratchett novels. So if you like those sorts of things, then TJ Klune's writing, I'm sure, will be your jam. This book is about found family. So the found family trope is basically people coming together and creating their own family network. I think that TJ Klune's writing style, and I've actually checked this, it's appropriate for both adults and children. So I would say that this would be a lovely book to read to a child. Like perhaps if you had sort of a child maybe 8 to 10 age, that you could read it to them. And I think that would be a really nice adventure to go on together. However, Daniel Henning's narration of this book was brilliant. He did all of the voices of the magical children, and as well as the other characters, and he just did it so well. Like, I was really impressed that he didn't sort of mess up and use like one style of talking for a character where it's meant for another one. They had quite unusual and like unique voices and ways of speaking. So yeah, he just did such a good job that I know that if I was to read it to a child, I would never be able to do as good of a job as Daniel Henning. So for that reason, I really recommend the book, but also I recommend the experience of the audiobook. So the other things that I liked about this book is that it has queer representation in it. I thought that the characters were quite quirky. I can't remember all of their names, but there was one youth who was a gnome, but a female character, but had a beard, and she really liked gardening. There was another one that was really into, his life aspiration was to like be a butler, and he really liked doing people's laundry. Yeah, and then there was Lucy was, I think, the best character, and Lucy is a boy, and Lucy is short for Lucifer, and it's just quite funny because that was my Lucy's nickname for when she was naughty. But yeah, so Lucy is the son of the devil, I think. But yeah, that child is just hilarious. So again, you've got that sort of Pratchett element coming through with the humor. And yeah, Linus is such a lovable character. He works for Dichomy, which is the department in charge of magical youth. There's lots of really funny bits for, he's getting his briefs on what to do, and is always signed off as like from extremely upper management, just sort of showing the pretentiousness of the whole thing. But and then in general, the bits that I really connected with were the discussions about, acknowledging feelings, your own feelings and feelings of others, having acceptance for children and anybody who's different, and, creating your own identity and appreciating your differences and your strengths. So yeah, this book will definitely have a special place in my heart forevermore. I think I will probably buy a physical copy of it and read it at some point. I enjoyed it that much. And I would like to read more from TJ Klune. I think there's a second book in this series possibly coming out soon. I'll have to check that. But in any case, I gave this one 5 stars, 5 out of 5. I think this is probably a contender for my favorite book of the year. It was that good. So yes, if you haven't read The House on the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune, very much recommend you do. And if you've got kiddos, then I would recommend reading it with them as well. All right, so moving away from the 5-star reads for a minute, we've got a 2-star read, and this was an audiobook, and it was The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. So I wanted to read or listen to Huckleberry Finn before I get to James by Percival Everett, which is a retelling. And this is obviously a book that from, the 1800s, I think. So it was written after the antebellum era in the US, the southern US. And going into reading anything, any sort of classic literature, that it's going to be of its time and there might be things that are problematic. But I would say that it's worth reading at least the Wikipedia page, if not some other articles about Huckleberry Finn and sort of like analyses of it before reading or listening to it. If you don't do that, I think you would miss the intention and the context of it, which is still problematic, but it becomes a little bit more apparent as to why it was written the way that it was. So Mark Twain wrote both The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, which is the sort of the first book, and I would say that it's probably helpful to have read Tom Sawyer first, but anyways, so Tom Sawyer, and then the second one, Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. He wrote them in vernacular, which means that he wrote them in a sort of parlance of the time, so using specific sayings and colloquialisms in the South for a particular type of people. And that was the first, as far as I know, that was the first book to really do that. And so that's why it's quite creative in that respect. It was also intended, according to the internet, intended to be satire. So it was written after the abolition of slavery in the South, but it's told as if it's still that context. And I think that element could get missed a lot. And, if you read the history of this on Wikipedia, you can see that Mark Twain came under criticism for that. And why? Well, it's because the language is just god-awful. The N-word is used a lot. There's, and by a lot, I mean a lot. There are offensive terms for Indigenous people, for women, just lots of language that you'd never have in print today. And so for that reason, it's a challenging book to read. It's quite jarring. And I certainly I was listening to it on audiobook, and I definitely at times needed to remember to put my headphones in. So, if I was sitting in my living room with the windows open, my neighbors are listening to maybe misunderstanding what I was listening to. So yes, the language is highly problematic in it. And for that reason, it really hasn't aged well at all. And I think was, even at the time it was published, contentious. I would also say that with a modern lens, the adventures that Huckleberry Finn goes on stems from severe neglect and child abuse. And it's just, you'd never have that type of thing written these days. I can see why the book appealed to some younger children, sort of back historically, because many of the things, so like his Huckleberry Finn's father was an alcoholic and abusive towards him, and so he had this sense of wanting to sort of run away and have go on this adventure. And I can see why that probably resonated with some children, given that many of them probably experienced similar situations. I did find several of the adventures that Huckleberry Finn and Jim went on. Jim is, well, I'll get to that in a second. So yeah, I found that many of the adventures that they went on were actually really entertaining. I wanted to find out what was going on. So for example, Huckleberry Finn and Jim are stuck on an island, and people are basically coming after Jim. So that's part of the storyline was interesting. There's also a bit about sort of not a steamboat, but those like paddle boat things. with some criminals on it. That part was interesting. But then the second half of the book was just so boring. And that's another reason why I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I can see why abridged versions of this work have come out, not only to moderate the language that's used, but also because large chunks of it are very dull. So there's particularly the confidence men. So it's basically like charlatans or people trying to like scam people. That whole section was not for me at all. And then, yeah, so I mentioned Jim. So Jim is, well, I hope this doesn't spoil it, but basically Jim is what Huckleberry Finn thinks of as the enslaved person of one of the families that Huckleberry Finn knows. And the whole, a large part of the book is about concerns for Jim that he's going to be caught. And the irony of it, and this is where you have to understand the context of the satires. The irony of it is that Jim was actually a free man, and you find out at the end that he was a free man. And from what I have read subsequently, some of the newer versions or retellings of Huckleberry Finn use the term slave, and that is actually ironically incorrect to talk about Jim. So yeah, there's many layers to Huckleberry Finn. I would say I'm glad I've read it, because I think it's always important to understand works that were pinnacles of their time. But because, one, it was problematic, and two, I found part of it quite dull, I only gave it 2 out of 5 stars. Would I recommend it? I certainly wouldn't recommend it to a younger audience. I think if you are quite analytical and you wanted to go into it understanding sort of why it was written and with the lens of a modern context, then yes, I think it is still worth reading. But yeah, still very problematic. Okay, I'm aware that I've already been talking for a while, so I'm going to try and speed things up. So the next book I listened to was an audiobook, and this one I was just needing something to basically fall asleep to, so I found a short audiobook on the Libby app, and this is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan, and it was narrated by Aidan Kelly. And this book it came out a couple of years ago, I think maybe in 2021, and it's set in the mid-1980s in Ireland, and it's actually set around Christmas time, so it's quite funny that I didn't realize that, but yeah, perhaps maybe one to read more in the winter, but anyways, so yes, it's set at Christmas time, and it follows the character of Bill Furlong, and he was quite a lovable character. I really did connect to him, even though you don't get to know him for that long, because it's quite a short book. But yeah, so Bill is a, what we call it, a supplier, a merchant of like coal and wood for houses, which I found interesting in and of itself, because it's set in the 1980s. And when I first started reading it, I thought it was actually set much earlier. So I guess I didn't realize that parts of Ireland were using coal still in the 80s. I mean, I know people still use coal these days, but I didn't realize it was as prevalent because, in the 80s, where I'm from, people had central heating. But yeah, so Bill is a coal merchant, and therefore he, connects to a lot of people in the community, and he also provides fuel for the convent. And being Ireland, the Catholic Church obviously has a lot of significance. And the book is basically about sort of tensions and social expectations in recognizing the control that the Catholic Church has over everything. And then if you're not familiar of it, it is also very much related to the mother and baby homes scandal. So yeah, Bill ends up uncovering secrets from the convent, and then has to kind of decide within himself what is the right thing to do. I thought the writing was beautiful. I thought that the narration was really enjoyable. I did feel like there was a tiny bit rushed, but I understand it was meant to be a short work of fiction anyways. But yeah, it's not something that I would normally pick up, but I enjoyed it, and I would definitely read more by Claire Keegan because I liked her writing. So yes, small things like these, if you like that type of literature, then I would recommend it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Okay, we've got 3 more books to go, and these are all books that I read for Mental Health May. And Mental Health May was a readathon that Kim over at Middle of the Book March was doing, and I wanted to partake in that because part of my work involves mental health support for students. I was going to read The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat by, I think, Oliver Sacks, but I didn't get to that one. Instead, I listened to 2 audiobooks. 2 audiobooks? Yes, 2 audiobooks. So the first one, and again, I picked this one up because it was short, is Stella Maris by Cormac McCarthy. And I went into this one completely blind. I know his work, and I really want to get to the road. So I had a sort of sense of what type of genre McCarthy wrote, but I didn't know anything about this book. And I think it would have been helpful to have context in retrospect. So this was actually his last novel that he wrote, and it's been described as a coda to an earlier book called The Passenger. And so, yeah, I'll explain. So The Passenger, from what I can gather, is about the brother Bobby and his life earlier. And then the book that I read, Stella Maris, is about Alicia, his sister. And this book is basically told as a transcript or recording of psychiatric sessions in a hospital with Alicia and her psychiatrist. And actually, apparently, it's before she kills herself. And I didn't get that context when listening to it, but I've since read, and that's apparently what happens. So yeah, so Alicia is a mathematician, and much of the conversation that she has in this transcription with the psychiatrist is about mathematics. It's very philosophical. I found it quite interesting, but it's very intellectual. They're sort of debating, life and the meaning of things. But she really keeps wanting to avoid any discussion about her brother. And when they eventually do get to the topic about her brother, it is incredibly disturbing and dark. I didn't see it coming, again, because I went in without any context to this. And I found it quite shocking because I didn't realize what this book was about. I wanted to read it because I thought it was about, a mental health hospital, and thought it would be good for Mental Health May. And it's actually much more complex than that. But so yeah, Alicia has a lot of difficulties. She has schizophrenia, and she also has a lot of complicated views and feelings that she needs to work out. And what I did enjoy about this book is the audio version. I don't think it would work well as a written book, to be perfectly honest, but the audio version was narrated by 2 people. So Eduardo Ballerini and Julia Whelan were the narrators, and it was like a conversation style, and I think that worked well. If it was on the written page, I think I would have been even more confused. So yeah, I give it 3 out of 5 stars. In retrospect, I probably shouldn't have read it because I think I missed a lot of the point of it, but It certainly got my attention partway through when you find out sort of part of why Alicia is struggling so much. But yeah, have you read Stella Maris? And then you know what I'm talking about? If so, then, you know, let me know in the comments below without giving any spoilers. Because yeah, that was disturbing. Moving on to something also disturbing, but in a much more positive way, is The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. And this is by Mark Hadden. So this book is very well known. It came out it came out quite a few years ago now, and did very well when it did come out. And I just never got to it. And I thought, okay, I'm looking for a relatively short audiobook, and I wanted something to do with mental health. So I thought that this book would be appropriate for that. And I'm so glad I read it. It was, or listened to it rather, because the audiobook was amazing. It was like a radio play. There were so many different characters narrated by different people. There were like sound effects. Yeah, it was very immersive, and I had a really enjoyable time listening to it despite its difficult content. The main narrator is Ben Tibber, and so he's a young person, and he did a really good job of narrating it, I thought. But yes, so this book is about a boy named Christopher who is, I think he's 15, and he has autism. And much of the book, so it's told from Christopher's perspective, and much of the book just seeks to, I think, portray a realistic impression of what it can be like to be on the autistic spectrum. I would say perhaps more on like the moderate to severe end of the spectrum, because Christopher certainly has challenges with, you know, understanding social cues and people touching him and having, you know, he has to go to a special school. So yeah, he definitely has his challenges, but also he's got so many strengths as well. Like he's got an amazing ability to compute numbers in his head. And in the story, he's doing his A-level maths, so like pre-university level maths. Yeah, so that it was just a wonderful representation of how it could look for somebody who lives with autism. And so the title, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, is basically about Christopher discovering that his neighbor's dog has been murdered, and Christopher wants to investigate to try and find out who killed the dog. And he then has to go on like this quest and put himself in uncomfortable positions, like talking to neighbors, going places he's never been, in order to sort of solve the mystery, let's say. But really, this book is more about Christopher and his family and sort of complex familial relationships. And it was just so well done. From my perspective, having worked with students on the autistic spectrum, I thought that it did a pretty good job. I didn't really work with anybody that had challenges to this degree, but in terms of the more like highlighting the more positives or sort of funnier sides of Christopher's personality, definitely saw those like lovely traits shining through. Yeah, and overall, I just found it really inspiring. I found the story moving, but also the way in which it was presented through the narration and this like radio play. I found it moving as well, and I found it surprising. I didn't know what I didn't suspect what was going to happen. And so for that reason, I gave The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime 5 stars. And last but not least, we have Losing Our Minds, What Mental Health Really Is and What It Isn't by Dr. Lucy Folks. And so this one is the only nonfiction book that I read in May. And again, I read it for the Mental Health May readathon. And this is academic in tone, but it is suitable for a general audience. And basically, Lucy Folks looks at sort of the changing definition of mental illness and how we use language to describe mental health and the implications of that. So, for example, one of the chapters sort of covers social media, and she goes into a lot of detail also about different studies that have been done where the participants are asked about their mental health. And she's just sort of pointing out that the way that those questionnaires are worded can sometimes be, the responses can be misconstrued depending on how the questionnaires are written, but also when these studies are then reported on in the media, they can be misinterpreted. And then also sometimes how things are portrayed on social media can be maybe exaggerated or misinterpreted as well. So she's basically making an argument that we just need to be mindful about the language that we use so that we can distinguish between people who are, have severe diagnoses of mental illness versus people who are struggling with common or everyday low mood, life's ups and downs, where they might not need a diagnosis and they may or may not need support, but that is different from people who are clinically suffering. And that if we use, for example, the term OCD, if you use it in a sort of a common way of like, oh, I was OCD about organizing my shoes, that's a very different meaning to somebody who has been diagnosed with OCD. Or I think depression and anxiety are ones that we use a lot. When somebody says, oh, I was so depressed, we use it in our sort of common vernacular these days. But somebody who is clinically depressed has a very different experience. And sometimes by misusing or changing the meaning of our language about mental health can sometimes be detrimental to the people at the far end of the spectrum who are struggling the most and need access to care the most. And she also talks a little bit about sort of like awareness raising campaigns, and that is really good. It's such a positive that we're encouraging people to talk about their own mental health and their ups and downs, and indeed for people who are really struggling to feel that they're able to reach out and get support. But as what's happened in the UK is we've got, and probably elsewhere, is that basically the system, the NHS, is overloaded. We've got too many people trying to access medicalization or, therapeutic treatment, many of whom do need support, but some of whom perhaps don't, and that perhaps they are just not currently dealing with life's ups and downs in the best way possible, using their own resilience and their support network around them. It's a really complicated issue. This is an area that I work in, trying to find that balance of getting people support who need it, and also trying to give people the tools to manage their ups and downs themselves and with their connections, their network. So yeah, it's a hugely complicated issue. It's something that's sort of at the forefront of discussion in the higher education sector right now, not only in the UK, but I'm sure in many parts of the world. So yes, this is a very good book if you're looking for sort of a starting point to understand the difference between mental illness and mental health. She does a really good job. There's two chapters rather. One is on the environment, and the other one is on biology and how genetics does play a role in people being predispositioned to having mental illness, but not guaranteeing it, and also that our environment can have a significant impact on whether or not we might develop a mental illness, and how those two kind of work together. And she also did another chapter on adolescence, because that's the developmental age in which most mental illnesses would present themselves, if they haven't already. So yeah, this was a good book. I would say a good part of the content I was already familiar with due to what I do for a living. Yeah, if you're interested in psychology and mental health research, then this is definitely one to pick up. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So yes, okay, I've been talking for a long time now, so to wrap it up, my favorite book of May was definitely Cerulean Sea. I thought that was gorgeous. I haven't yet finished some books, unsurprisingly, because I like to jump around a little bit with my reading, but I'm still working on It's Not That Radical by Michaela Loach, Beloved by Toni Morrison. That loan has just come back to me, so I'll be able to finish that in June. I'm also reading The New Wilderness by Diane Cook, which is a dystopian, and I'm almost finished Miss Benson's Beetle by Rachel Joyce. And for June, I'm taking part in the Read Historical Fiction 2024 readathon by Shelly-ish. So most of the books that I'll be reading in June will be historical fiction. I'm hoping to fill in the bingo card she's created. I'll pop her channel down below so you can find the details if you're wanting to participate in that readathon. It's been getting a lot of attention and it looks like so much fun, so I'm excited to get to it. But yeah, so with that being said, I had an excellent reading month in May. I'm looking forward to June. Have you read any of the books that I've mentioned here today? If yes, let me know in the comments, and also let me know what was your favorite book that you read in May, because I'm always looking for new suggestions. And with that being said, I hope you're doing really well. I hope you are enjoying whatever it is that you're reading, and I will see you soon in a new video.